Well, 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 if you just tuned in and saw some guy waving a record around in front of a cheap camera, you must know it's me, Malcolm Tent, from Danbury, Connecticut, with the latest episode of the Malcolm Tent Shoot interview series. Coming at you in a sort of airsats live fashion. If you're watching this live in real time on Facebook, I took the liberty of pre-recording this, but we're streaming it live, and I am here offering commentary, moderation, answering questions, and doing all that kind of fun stuff. If you're watching this on my YouTube channel, well, there you know the secret of it. It was live, but it really wasn't live. And now it's definitely not live, but it's here. It's happening. It's right now, dude. So thanks for tuning in. Thanks for turning on. And thanks for getting ready to drop out of your mind as we lay down some serious history about the Western Connecticut scene. My guest today, in for his second installment in the hot seat, is none other than Mr. Craig Colorusso of m.u.d.d Industries, the mailroom at Trash American Style, and now currently of, oddly enough, Craig Colorusso. Say hello, Craig. What's up?
Hello.
All right, I'm glad we got that over with. All right, enough of that. No more of that jive-ass turkey. I got to continue my spieling, baby. I'm boiling hot. Last time we had Craig sitting in the hot seat, we talked for a solid hour about some really good history about Danbury, Western Connecticut. We started in the hardcore scene, the Brookfield hardcore straight edge scene, and worked our way up through the 90s. And we traced the evolution of Craig's musical and artistic thang from the aforementioned straight edge hardcore into more outside avant-garde experimental type stuff. So if you want to get the full background and you haven't seen that previous episode, do so. And what we're saying now today will probably make a whole heck of a lot more sense than it would if you didn't. But either way, it's still going to be entertaining because it's quite a story, man. Craig Colorusso has been through a number of different evolutions, and it's been great talking about that and tracing it. So hello, Craig. Welcome back.
Hi, Malcolm. Thank you for having me.
Glad to have you here. So yeah, man, when we left off on our earlier talk, we were literally right on the cusp of your journey from straight edge hardcore kid to 90s, and I hope you'll forgive this term, alt rocker, and now sort of going beyond. You know, we talked about how you were always interested in stretching the limits and pushing the envelopes and having a sort of like an overarching idea about things. And now the idea is really starting to crystallize. So let's pick it up. You, at this point in the game, you're doing stuff like Olive Grain, Static Press 19. Maybe tell us a little bit about that, just a smidge, so we can kind of overlap with the last episode, and tell us where it goes from there.
Sure. I think, Static Press 19 for me was a great segue leaving China Pig. China Pig was just one of those things. It was like the first real band I was in, and it just felt like everything it sometimes just came off my fingertips like magic. And then it ended. And so then I wasn't really sure what to do. And then I quickly got together with some other guys that I hadn't played with before. And we started to kind of, make these compositions and try and add some improv in there. And it was a kind of like a learning kind of space for me to try and figure out how to make music without FUD, really. Because FUD and I have been playing for quite a while. And, and Westerdale and I, we did a thing called Diving Bell after China Pig. It was just the two of us, kind of taking some of our ideas from China Pig and really stretching them out. And then we did Tog Music and Machina. And then he split, he went off to school. And, so then I started playing with Static Press 19, and I found myself once again back on stage and loving it, but my mind was starting to wander. I do like being on stage, but there's always going to be that barrier between the audience and the performer, and that really always bugged me from the start. And it was really starting to unnerve me a bit in Static Press 19. And then, Static Press 19 was short-lived. I moved to Northampton, Massachusetts. And Bonnie, Gene Wisnowski, and I, we did Olive Grain. We toured the whole country, and then we relocated to Northampton. And I think the thing for Olive Grain that was different was that we didn't need to interface with a PA because it was just her vocals. And, you know, ultimately she didn't really like using any kind of equipment with her voice. She just wanted to fill the space with her voice. And that was perfectly fine with me because I didn't really want to play really loud music anymore. And so we found ourselves in these situations where we didn't need the stage. We didn't need the rock club. We didn't need all that stuff. And it was all the stuff I disliked anyway. So win-win, right?
Yeah.
We played at the 40 Watt Club in Atlanta, Georgia. And I remember the guy was just like, you know, he just kept trying to get us in on this PA thing. And I'm like, dude, let's just make it easy for all of us. You set up, you know, the mid band and then the headliner. We'll set up, we have our own carpet. We'll just set up on the floor in front of the stage and you don't even have to deal with us, you know? And he was kind of like, well, what are you going to do about that? And I felt like we did it and we played really well and it worked. It really, really worked. And so I think that, you know, going back to Static Press 19 and my China Pig being on stage, my mind was wandering. I felt like Olive Grain gave me a chance to sort of pursue some of those ideas. And I think it, you know, once again, I saw it as, you know, a learning space to kind of figure out what I wanted to do.
Yeah. Well, one project you just mentioned a second ago, and that we touched on a little bit in the last episode, was the Tog music.
Oh, yes.
The 24-hour performance piece. And I was thinking about that after we got done talking earlier about that. There were a lot of elements in Tog music. And also in another piece you did at Trash American Style, the Music to Buy Records to, which was a like eight hour long installation. And that thing in Tog music, I think, had a lot of similarities with what you're doing now, in that they were very site specific. They totally relied on the atmosphere at hand to create and sculpt the music and the sound itself. And it also relied a lot on certain elements coming in and coming out of the picture, and thus influencing the picture as a whole in a kind of random fashion, while the whole thing was still premeditated. Am I right, or am I just full of jive?
No, you're definitely right. And I think for me, once I started to think about performing music live outside of like the PA fashion, it just seemed like the possibilities became endless. You know, Westerdale and I were doing Tog music, and it was at Dr. Java's Cafe. And I remember they were making a cappuccino and the foam thing just was like hissing incredibly loud. And we both kind of looked at each other and we were like, oh, that's awesome. That just sounds so perfect. You know what I mean? And it was like, if it was a proper show, quote unquote, proper show, our volume would have just overtaken that and it would have just destroyed what was there. And, you know, it was one of those things where I was like, this is beautiful. How can I do this again? How can I recreate situations for things like this to continue to happen? Because it was so amazing. And yeah, I think that for me, I sort of like what we were talking about before about the dilemma with composition versus improvisation, and kind of like, you know, there's got to be a reason why we're here. And part of that is letting the environment be part of the gig. I mean, that's a very John Cage thing. I mean, we're all part of this thing, and I dig that. And you know, being in bands like Static Press 19 and Olive Grain really helped me really fine tune what it was I wanted. And so it was perfect.
Yeah, right on. And it's interesting that you sort of fine tuned any aspect of a band right out of the picture.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I really struggle with this a lot because I love music. I've said a number of times in interviews that I hate music, and you know, sometimes I just say that to piss people off, to be honest. But because I don't love, obviously, I mean, I have all these records and I listen to them. But there is something, I have to admit, there was something ultimately disappointing about music, in the sense that in the timeliness of it. On the Beach by Neil Young is like one of my all-time favorite songs. You know, it's over in 7.5 minutes. And there is like that crushing blow where it's just over. And I'm just like, fuck, you know, it's over. I could just play it again, but that's just not the same thing. And so I've often, what would it be like instead of music being this time-based thing that happens? What if instead it was some kind of sculpture or piece of architecture that you could crawl into for a couple of months and just be with it? That's where I was headed, in basically from, Diving Bell, Static Press 19, and Olive Green. I just didn't know how to get there. I think I'm on my way now, but it's a long haul, man.
Yeah, well, the time, it's kind of ironic because time itself is always going to have limitations, like as far as the human organism can relate to it. Because we can only stay awake for so long. We can only be cognizant of something for so long. So maybe the question is how to saturate one's consciousness while one is conscious. Just the thought. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's great. I do think that I think of music when I do still make music for music's sake. Like I have a composition right now that I'm working on. It's going to be in 3 parts, and it's called The Octopus Lull, and it's basically 20-minute sections. And I think that's because I love records. I relate to music still to this day as records. I still call CDs records because that's what they are in my mind. And I think that that's just how I've digested that and how it's been categorized in my mind. Like a piece of music can last 20 minutes because that's how much you can fit on a side. And now I'm starting to think about things longer and sort of bigger and more elaborate, but I still, to this day, still think about music in 20-minute chunks.
Interesting. That's very interesting. And it's also valid too, I just think about the pieces I do. I do a lot of experimental stuff myself. And they always seem to top out, like my things always seem to top out around a half hour or so. They kind of wear out their welcome after about a half hour or so, So it's interesting. We all have our perception of what is finite and what actually works, as a limitation.
Interesting.
And the things that you do now, like I'm like really, really keen on this. And I keep talking about Sunboxes because that's the one I'm the most familiar with. That's the one that I've seen the most and been with the most. Tell us how you came up with that idea, the whole concept, and explain to the people what it is, because it's nothing like anything I've ever seen before.
Sure. Sunboxes is a solar-powered sound installation. It is comprised of 20 speakers that are all solar-powered. There's no batteries, and they each play a pre-recorded guitar note as long as there's enough sun. The catch is that all of those guitar notes are a different length. So as they repeat, they constantly realign. And so according to my calculations, I'm no mathematician, but it would take 3.12 months before the whole piece would cycle around, which is impossible on this planet. I do love the idea of impossibility. So the start of Sunboxes, in 2008, my really good friend, Sexy David Sanchez, called me up and he said, yo, make something solar. We're going to the desert, and just hung up. I will backtrack a bit. Sexy David Sanchez was a guy I met on the China Pig tour in 1995. He had a gallery called the Citizens Gallery. And I heard that there's this crazy guy named David Sanchez that has a gallery in Richmond, Virginia, and he books bands and he likes cool music. So I sent him a tape. We had a brief conversation. He's like, yeah, man, it sounds like, right up our alley, very casual. He's like, I'll be able to give you $50 when we're done. And I was like, awesome, man, we'll be there. So we rolled into Richmond, and, I'd never been there before. And, I met Dave, he was nice enough. And we just we played really well. Like I was saying earlier, sometimes those China Pig shows were a little messy. This was a particularly good one. And so, we opened up, we played, I thought we kicked ass, we're loading out. And then all of a sudden Westerndale comes out and he's like, hey, I think you need to get inside, man. Something weird's happening. I was like, okay. So I go in and I get ushered into this room where there's all these like fire marshal types, like fire executives, like dudes that haven't like been on a truck in years, but they're all deep in like, fire world, and they're connected to the local government there. Turns out the local rock club felt threatened by what Dave was doing. So they called their buddies at the police and the fire department and had Dave's whole thing shut down. And it was like a circus, man. They pulled me in this room. They're like, what's going on here? And I lied. They said, what are you getting paid? I said, well, it was a casual pass the hat thing. And, we thought Dave was a cool guy, and we wanted to play in Richmond. And, and they were like, well, thank you very much for coming to Richmond. Please come back. I get ushered away. Anyway, long story short, turns out a bunch of people were living there illegally, and they did this whole investigation with like some tax evasion and some fire code issues. So basically we were loading out, and then everything that was in the gallery was being put out on the street. They were shutting the doors, padlocking everything. Everyone was going to jail. And so I was like, wow, that's crazy, man. So I finally find Dave, and he's like, hey, you guys were great. Please come back to Richmond. Here's your money. Once again, thanks. And I was like, any dude that gives me money on his way to jail is a friend for life. So I gave him a shirt so he can maybe trade it for cigarettes in jail. Anyway, that guy calls, you take the call, right? Yeah. So I was like, yeah, I'll make something solar. I'll meet you in the desert. And we did this thing called Off the Grid, where we're making art using sustainable energy. And my contribution was sunboxes. And I just started playing around with this chord and thinking about solar energy. And I thought, how cool would it be to play this chord, the B flat 6, through 20 Fender Champs in the middle of the desert? And I love that amp, and I just thought that would be amazing. And so with the help of DJ, my trusty friend from Brookfield, he helped me build the speaker cabinets. And John Pisani, another guy from the scene, he built the custom boards. And we bought all the parts, put them all together. And I just, basically just drove out there, and I was like, let's do this. It was awesome. And, I don't always think about these things in the long term. I was just so excited to hang out with Dave, make something new, and go to the desert. And, as I was going out there, in my mind, it was just this, I was just going to make this piece, and then I was going to come home and be done with it. But as I was out there, I started to like really see what was happening and what was possible. And it just blew me away. It really blew me away. It became so much cooler than it was in my head. And I feel like, mission complete. And so I was driving back I was living in Massachusetts at the time. And I was like, well, that's that. This piece was made for the desert, and I'm moving back to Massachusetts. There's no deserts there. What am I gonna do? Set this thing up in like a Home Depot parking lot? And then like another 100 miles goes by, and I'm like, well, wait a second. There's beaches, there's grass, there's all kinds of beautiful spaces in Massachusetts. So yeah, you can do this again. And I just took that, and I just ran with it, man. I took the ball and I ran till I got tired, and I'm still not tired yet.
Nice. That totally gets back to what you were saying earlier in our previous episode about how you just like to do things and make things happen. It's not enough to be a spectator, as Flipside Magazine said, be more than a witness.
Yeah, I do meet a lot of people that, they're comfortable with just coming up with the idea, and I respect that. But I guess I just get crazy. Like, it's cool to have the idea, but I feel like it's just a failure for me unless I stand before it as a finished product. And that in itself is just sort of like a silly concept, because none of these things are ever really finished. They always twist and turn. And, I feel like I'm creating these systems that evolve, and that's what I'm really after. The pursuit of evolution.
Yeah, right on. And the piece itself, Sunboxes, kind of has that pursuit every time that you stage it because of all the different variables involved. The amount of sunlight, cloud cover, atmospheric noises, people interacting with it. There's no possible way you could ever have a definitive version.
Yeah, and so I actually, do you remember Mark Ospavat? He has a studio in Brooklyn. Yeah. Love Mark, love the studio. So I brought the Sunny. There's a way to plug the Sunnies in so we could repair them and do work without having to do it outside. And so I went down there, I set them all up, and we plugged them in. And man, it just didn't sound good. And I was like, whatever, we'll just keep going. I love Mark. He does a really great job. I've done some other stuff with him before. And we're listening, and I'm just not thrilled. And then finally, day 2, I'm like, this kind of sucks, and in the meantime, Kevin Belli from Creature Did was making a film about 3 short pieces, or a short film about 3 of my pieces, and one of them was Sunboxes. And so he was sending me the dailies of stuff we had shot, and there was like this one scene in Massachusetts, actually, and you know, you can hear the leaves crunching under people's feet. You could hear bug sounds. And all this stuff was such a big part of Sunboxes. And by design in Mark's studio, all that was pushed out. And I felt like, all right, Mark, let's settle up, buddy. I mean, I love you, but I can't do this. So from then on, I just made field recordings because it really is just one element. So the music of Sunbox is just one element of the piece. That's the thing.
Right.
And so I don't think I'll ever do that again. I don't think I'll ever bring those into a studio.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. I was meditating upon that earlier today because anybody who knows me knows my mania for recording and documenting everything. And I've always got a recorder on me. And I brought my recorder to a Sunboxes thing you did in Brookfield, Connecticut. And I tried to record it. And after a while, I just kind of gave up because it didn't make any sense to try to crystallize it, to freeze it, and to listen to it in total isolation. It really wasn't possible. It's one of those things that you literally have to be there in the middle of in order to really experience it.
Yeah. I mean, that's one of the things that I talk about all the time, because there's usually a lecture component when I do stuff at universities or museums. And, you know, look, every like cheesy rocker dude's going to use that come online to, a young female at their concert, like, hey baby, it's different in every room. And yeah, I get it, man. That line works, but Sunboxes literally is different everywhere it goes. I mean, there's so many components to it. And, you know, for me, it's interesting because I'm so familiar with the actual sounds of Sunboxes. It becomes a sound like listening thing for me because I'm aware of all the other sounds that aren't Sunboxes. They scream out at me almost in a sense. And it's amazing. I think, you know, this is the direct like result of thinking about music, playing music outside of a PA, because, you know, in a typical fashion, it's like you come and you take over the space and you just blurt it out. You know, to me, Sunboxes is a system that improvises with Mother Nature. You know, it plays with what's already there. And I feel like, you know, look, I love Richard Serra's work, but, you know, in my mind, that's just big dick art. You know, it's just this giant phallic symbol that just gets pushed in the middle of nowhere. I feel like I just want to enhance what's already there. You know, the world is a beautiful place. I feel like let's work with that.
Ain't nothing wrong with that, man. So what other pieces do you have? I mean, we know Sunboxes. I know of sheet music. Tell us a little bit about that one.
Oh, cubemusic.
Cubemusic, sorry. Cubemusic.
Yeah, cubemusic. Cubemusic was 6 4-foot by 4-foot aluminum cubes that have sound and light coming out of them. And, you know, so my roommate in Waterbury, as well as Westerly, I live with this guy, Ryan Blessing, my best friend. And his family is a sheet metal shop. And one day he came home with this pile of metal, and there's like these little holes that get punched out, and they make holders for cell phones in Porsches. And then the rest is called a skeleton, and they use that to recycle, and it's just waste at that point. And so he came home with a bunch of those, and I was like, whoa, what are those things, man? And he said, oh, I didn't have enough room in the dumpster, so I just put them in my truck. And I said, hold on, let's take these out. And so I hung them up on my wall in Waterbury, and they were offset so I could see the light make these shadows through the holes and like do all these distorted things as the sun moved. And I was just blown away, man. I thought, this is so beautiful. And it was one of those things where I could see the metal, I could hear the music. It was just a matter of getting it out. And so I left Waterbury and I moved to New York, and I called him up one day and I was like, hey, can you make me a cube out of those skeletons? I want to do something with sound and light. And so we talked about it for a little while, and he didn't have any more of those jobs. So he replicated it on some aluminum and shipped it to me in Brooklyn. And I remember sitting there like, you know, with this makeshift light fader and playing my guitar in my loft in Brooklyn, and just like slowly kind of putting it all together. And then we'd have these long conversations about what the other shapes would be. And slowly over probably 8 weeks, he sent me a different cube. And so finally I had all 6, and then I went off and did it. It was awesome.
Wow.
So a side note with cubemusic, I just made the music the way I thought it should be made. And then I did the math, and it turns out that music takes 28 days before it starts over again. And I was totally blown away by that. I thought, wow, that's really cool. And then, you know, mind wandering, that's cool, but that's really arbitrary. There's no reason it has to be 28 days long. Wouldn't it be cool if we made something that needed to be 28 days? And so then 3 years ago, I made this thing called the m.u.d.d, which is a 12-foot by 12-foot structure that plays music based on the fullness of the moon. So it starts in silence for the new moon, it crescendos to a 30-note chord for the full moon, and it waxes and wanes in different patterns, so each are unique. And so, boom, there you go. Evolution.
Now, doesn't that kind of make you think that you could somehow marry that to sun boxes and get a 24-hour piece?
Well, interestingly enough, that show was in Colorado Springs. The moon pod was only supposed to be up for a year, but it just kept getting extended, so it was up for 3 years. I went out there, I left the Sunnies with them for a semester, and a choreographer made a piece for dancers, sun boxes, and the moon pod. And so they were moving the boxes around, catching the light and placing them down. And I was like, my God, that's beautiful. That is so amazing. All these things that I love, all put together. So yeah, it was like a home run, man.
See, and that's the beauty of it too, because it's like what you said earlier about transcending the limits of a PA. Once you start you start to transcend the limits of rock and roll, of so-called music, of time, of meter. Things really do become infinite.
Yeah.
Now I got to wonder: are you familiar with the works of Lamont Young?
Oh, of course. I love Dreamhouse.
Yeah, a lot of similarity there. A lot of similarity. Did you actually study Lamont Young, or is it accidental?
Well, I mean, I went there a lot. I clocked in many hours there and listening to it. I spoke to him a few times. He's just a giant weirdo. I mean, it's I don't know how well it went, but I love his music, and I think he was definitely a big influence. And I think specifically the Dreamhouse, just once again, it's music because you hear it, but it's so much more. And I think that really was a amazing thing for me.
Yeah, Dreamhouse is one of my favorite things in the world. For those who might not know who are watching, it's basically it's been running forever in New York. It's a installation with these sine wave generators and light, and there's incense burning. It's a total atmosphere. And the essential concept is if you stand in one place, it sounds like something, but if you move, the sounds change. And so
even if you like yawn or something and your ears just shift a little bit, everything just opens up.
Yeah.
I mean, I think Lamont Young is definitely a good example of like just seeing the possibilities and going after it. For me, it was definitely mind blowing when I first went there. And I went there on a whim. I saw like that fanzine Halana. I picked it up in New York. I was standing there and I was like, oh, Lamont Young. I've heard about this guy. It's before the internet, right? I was like, I've heard about this guy. This is the thing. And so I picked up the magazine and I saw that the Dreamhouse was open that day, and I went, and it was just like perfect. This is exactly what I want out of my life, man.
Yeah. My entree. No, go ahead.
I was gonna say, I think I got a bootleg maybe from you of Lamont and Marion singing with the ocean that got scrapped by the big major record company. And I was so excited about that. I thought it was so cool. And I remember talking to one of the monitors at the Dreamhouse. I was like, I got this bootleg thing. And he's like, oh, no. You can't listen to that because that's not what they really intended. And it's a tragedy. And he went on this whole big thing. I was like, yeah, dude, I'm going to listen to it, man, because it's awesome. I swear to God, Malcolm, I went home that night, put it in the tape player, it got eaten. The spirit of Lamont and Marion were there in my room saying, you can't listen to this, man.
Well, it's okay. I'll hook you up with another one if you need it. They haven't haunted my house yet, luckily. I mean, my entree to Lamont Young and Marion Zazila was through the Velvet Underground, as it was for so many people. Getting heavily into the Velvets and then into John Cale and learning, where he learned a drone technique, and it's all Lamont Young, man. Fantastic stuff.
Yeah.
So tell us about other things you've done. Now, what's the thing I was thinking was called sheet music, where you had a cube with sheets hanging and lights on the inside?
Yeah, that's called MB89.
Okay.
That was before cube music. And, before all this stuff, it was right after I was living in Northampton, and I got a chance to do something at the the Ninja Turtle museum people. They have a space up there. And I basically cornered myself into a room and covered myself with muslin fabric and did this thing with blue lights and just played. And, I wanted to play for hours, but I could only do it a little bit. It was cool. They had an elevator there actually. And I didn't like the way you walked in from the stairway. So what I did was I had my dad come and take people up to the 3rd floor with the elevator. And then they would walk down on the other side. So they would walk in and see it the right way. And, at the end of the night, he came down and saw the thing and he's like, oh yeah, this is cool. But, my elevator ride was so awesome because I could hear it, the volume would increase when I'd get there and then it would go away as I would go up. And I was like, man, me and my dad should make a piece about elevators. And
yeah, right. Well, I loved what you were talking about earlier, playing along with the printing presses. And it made me remember a desktop copier, a desktop printer I had at one time that did the exact same thing. It had this great rhythm to it, and it emitted this sort of tone. I recorded hours of this thing, and I'm still trying to figure out exactly what to do with them. Maybe nothing, because it stands on its own.
Right.
Music is wherever you find it, man.
Well, I think, I don't know when this was, but, the day I realized I could make music outside of songs was like a tremendous day. The world just seemed infinite. And, it was a long time coming. I remember I was in New York and it was like 4 a.m. and I heard like this ruckus downstairs. And it was like some Spanish speaking family arguing. And I don't really speak Spanish that well, so I wasn't able to understand what they were saying. But so it just appeared as music to me. It was like the man was yelling at the woman and then the woman was yelling back at the man. It was just like this dialogue. And then underneath it, the baby started to scream and it was just beautiful, And I feel like, wow, there's music everywhere if you're open to it.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I think that sound has always been such a big presence in my life and I've just never really known what to do with it. Because I wasn't one of those guys that could play. I couldn't play it that well. I mean, we've talked about this before. I feel like I've gone through being a musician. I feel like I've had more balls than talent most of my life. And I feel like that bothered me when I was younger. Because I knew guys in high school or even younger that could play like Eruption by Eddie Van Halen. And, that's awesome. But I knew I couldn't do that. So it wasn't even like, I didn't even try. I just kind of went off in a different direction. And now I sort of feel like that, that's just another tool in my toolbox. It doesn't bother me as much. And I feel like virtuosity is something. I just don't know that it's for me.
Right. Yeah. Saying to you, use the phrase again, nothing wrong with that. I mean, what is a limitation? How do you define limitation? There's really, it doesn't mean anything when you get right down to it. It's
Sure.
Meaningless. It means nothing. So what else you got, man? Tell us about more Craig Colorusso projects we might not be addressing here.
Well, I just did this new thing called Soundswings. It's 3 swings they're these angled pieces of steel that come out, and then there's a swing, and as you swing on them, they make sound. And is one of those great experiences. This woman saw cubemusic at a gallery here in Arkansas, and she worked for a real estate development company, and she brought her boss, and he liked it, and so they said, hey, let's have a meeting. And they're like, look, we like what you do. We're not exactly sure what it is, but we do like it. We're doing this thing. Why don't you make us something? Right off the bat, we don't have a budget for sound art, but we have budgets for things. Go make something. And I thought, okay. And at the time, my daughter was, like 3 years old, and we've been swinging on the swing set. And, I don't recall ever being on a swing. So it was all kind of new to me. And seeing my daughter, flying in the air, I could see her face just look so different. And I thought, that's beautiful. What can I do to enhance that? And so the idea would make these swings that make sound kind of enhance that sort of like limitless again, that idea of just yeah, these are swings, but let's go a little bit further, man. Let's just go a little bit higher. Let's just see where this all goes. And, you know, it turned out to be really great. The idea of the swings is that each of the three swings has a separate composition. And as they, you know, as you sit on one, it plays the music. And then when you get off, it pauses. And then it resumes when someone else gets up there and starts to swing again. If you go all three swings 24/7, the piece will last 55 days. But with the coming and going of people, it's infinite.
Yeah. You're only getting little segments of it for the duration that you're in it. So you'll never, ever experience the whole thing.
Yeah, and it's also like that idea, you know, like you were talking about earlier with the Sunnies, like it's just this idea of, I think, you know, with the way information gets pushed around now, everything's cut and paste. You know, everything is, you can see everything on the internet. It's here and there. And I feel like I want to make stuff that is continuously making unique experiences. You know, I hate to sound like that old grumpy guy, but like when I'm out and about and I see these kids with their faces glued to devices, it just bums me out, you know, and I want to make stuff where people come and it's actually better when you're there with your friends and you can put the thing away, you know, I mean, yeah.
Yeah. No need to go on a tirade. We're probably on the same page as far as that goes. I mean, I love it. I just love, once again, you know, to trace the arc from straight edge hardcore as a teenager in Brookfield to the literally infinite possibilities. You know, it's actually, as we talk about it, it's a very linear, logical path from point A to point infinite.
Yeah, I think so. And, you know, aside from the actual art of like hardcore and stuff, I learned so much about, you know, so you have this idea of music and what to do with it. You know, I mean, at the time, like Revelation Records was amazing. You know, it was like, you know, Jordan, he's just a guy, but he's making this music that the entire world is listening to. That's awesome. You know, and there's like very strategic things that you have to do. It's very structured. You have to get these things out. You have to get them out on time and all that stuff. And I feel like I learned all that stuff through hardcore. And, you know, my wife is really smart. She's been to a million colleges. She has a law degree. And one of our conversations always is like, look, I learned more by being in bands than I did in school because I'm not that smart. I don't like school. I just don't like it. And I feel like I learned so much by just dealing with people and getting stuff done. I mean, that's the way it goes. I mean, that's how I learned about stuff. And all that goes back to being in hardcore bands, being what did you say, an alt rocker? Yeah.
Yeah, alt rocker, sorry.
You know, alt rocker, being like a male guy in the trash. I mean, yeah, I remember getting letters from guys like from other countries that were like, you know, they would write these things that are barely in English and they're like, excuse my English. And I'd be like, dude, I don't even know what country you're from. I think it's amazing that you're writing a letter in English. Like, that's awesome. You know, that was a great experience. And, you know, I think music has that way of like bringing people together. And I think that that's what I'm trying to do now with these pieces, but in a different way.
Yeah, and it's still at its very core, it's about DIY, having the vision and pursuing it until it's done, and that's great. So this, I think, is a really good opportunity to wrap up this segment
Okay.
of the shoot interview. Unless there's anything you want to wrap up and tell people about what's going on now, how to find you. What do people need to know about Craig Colorusso right here, right now?
I have a website called craigcolorusso.com. I have a few ideas that are on the verge of hatching. So all the info will be there. I have this new recording I'm working on called Octopus Lull. It's a composition in 3 sections for basically guitar, clarinet, and bass clarinet. And it's going to be coming out soon.
Nice. So that was cool, man. It was an excellent second segment that brought us up to date. So if you want to come back and do one more, we can dive into the record label. And the label's still active, is it not? m.u.d. Industries?
Yeah, I shifted it to m.u.d., m.u.d.d. You know, I don't know, just to make it difficult for people like you that track everything down, I guess.
You weren't feeling muddy anymore, more moody than muddy. That's fine.
I've always been moody, man.
Maybe it's just a sign of maturity. Who knows?
Yeah, I still, you know, I work with Greg Vegas now. You know, he's my actual rep for my streaming music, and you know, I got a bunch of stuff up there. And I have to admit, though, it feels like a failure that I'm not actually making records that I can send to people. But it's the world I'm in right now. But I do hope to. I document everything, and I hope to someday release all this stuff on vinyl because I think it would look and sound amazing.
Yeah, no doubt, no doubt. And we can get into some of the background of that when we come back for episode 3 and we talk about Mud Industries and the output you had in the 90s. There's a lot of good music that you put out, and I think it all stands the test of time. It's valid.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I'll say about that is, one day I woke up and I realized that the top 5 bands that I loved, I knew all the people in those bands, and I thought, what an amazing life I have here.
Yeah, that's great, man. That's really not many people can boast of that. That's really cool. And we will dissect that in detail when we come back for the third heaping helping of the Malcolm Tent Shoot interview with Craig Colorusso, who's been dynamite so far, man. Great talking to you. And yeah, as usual, look for me, Malcolm Tent, on Facebook. If you're not here on Facebook already, look for me. YouTube, same deal. Malcolm Tent on YouTube. I'm very entertaining when I got people like Craig Colorusso and my other guests who have been with me and who will be with me in the future. So definitely come back for the third episode of me and Craig Colorusso. In the meantime, stay sane and don't take any wooden nickels. Until we meet again, this is Malcolm Tent saying so long from the Nutmeg State.